You should really pay attention to the things your kids watch on TV. I remember the first time I was snapped from my cartoon-laced delusion. I lost a part of my childlike innocence that day. That helped shape my views of the world forever. My older sister and I were watching television like we did every evening before bed. It was the early 90s. I was barely 6 years old. My sister was almost 9. A special report from Illinois popped onto the TV showing a large man. He wore a sinister grin that was exaggerated by a smear of red makeup. Blue triangles took up most of the area around his eyes. The rest of his face, white, like cold cream. His suit was complicated. A strange clown suit. Half of it solid red, the other half red and white striped. A frilly red and white collar puffed from under his second chin. A white-gloved hand was raised in a frozen wave. The newscaster said the man had been arrested for taking the lives of 33 young children, mostly boys. We lived nowhere near Illinois, but my young mind didn't understand that. I barely was able to understand or process what I was hearing. All I knew was that 1 hour ago, I liked clowns. After seeing this, I was terrified, especially being a young child myself. I can't remember this next part, but it was talked about so much by family members over the years that I almost feel like I do. 6-year-old me burst into hysterics. I was heard throughout the house wailing to my sister, "But Bubby, I thought all clowns were nice." It was an hour before I was able to be calmed. My dad sat me down, got out his map of the United States and showed me how far away from Illinois we were. When that didn't work, he explained to me that they'd caught him and locked him away. The world was safe from him forever. I couldn't understand why anyone would want to hurt children, let alone a clown. Clowns were supposed to bring joy, happiness, and laughter, not hunt down kids and stack their bodies underneath his house. My father distracted me with something normally forbidden for bedtime: ice cream. My childhood innocence and mirth slowly returned with each syrup-drizzled bite, but only a percentage. Before long, my dad was able to get me to fall asleep. A part of me knew it still bothered me. I just couldn't figure out why. Flash forward decades later. I'm divorced with a 15-year-old son of my own, that my ex Brandon and I share custody of. I still absolutely hate clowns. Last Christmas, Brandon sent me a wind-up clown figurine, a special fuck you for the holiday season. I tried to be the bigger person. However, I couldn't help but send a thank you card in response. It contained only 5 words. Thanks for the excellent gift. If that wasn't bad enough, the new year brought a new trend. News reports all over the United States are appearing left and right about all things clown sightings. It's quickly becoming known as the Year of the Clown. They're popping up everywhere: schools, supermarket parking lots, forests, backyards, etc. Some stood there harmlessly, but there were others with far more sinister intentions. A part of my subconscious reverts to the age of 6 every time a new sighting is announced. I'm too jumpy to conceal and carry, so I always keep a knife on me, just in case. I figure it's only a matter of time before one pops up where we live. If I ever do encounter one, hopefully it just stands there like a creep. It's a juvenile event for sure, but one that seems to unnerve the whole country. Halloween's barely 7 short months away. Brody will be 16 by then and too old for trick-or-treating. I still can't help but worry about the upcoming holiday. He'll most likely want to go out with friends, and I'd stopped accompanying when he was 11. If the clown shit didn't let up, I'd have to keep him home this year. I'd rather have him pissed off at me than in danger, or worse, dead. The trend intensifies, spreading worldwide now instead of just being limited to the US. The week before Halloween has rapidly approached, and I'm arguing with Brody about wanting to go out. After telling him for the 10th time how I won't change my mind, even though it hurts me to say, he charges off to his room and slams the door. The moment it closes, I hear a torrent of furious swears of complaint from within his room. Later, I feel bad about what has happened and go to his room to end the night on a better note. The space under the door shows the glow of his bedroom light, signaling that he's still awake. After a quick knock, I turn the knob and open the door. Within the hoarder's hell that is his room, I finally locate a Brody-shaped bundle underneath the covers of his bed. He must have dozed off with the light on. Not wanting to disturb him, I turn off the light and shut the door. I wash the dinner dishes and turn off the kitchen light before attempting to head to bed myself. I hover over the sink and look out the window while I let my hands air dry. The blood in my veins chills as I notice something out of place in my periphery. A motionless figure stands out against the blowing branches of the trees at the edge of the woods. A clown, with electric green hair and red makeup on a white face. I clench my eyes shut and slam my hands on the ledge of the sink to try to wake myself up from the nightmare before me. When I open my eyes again, no one's there. I blame it on exhaustion. It's easier to accept than the truth. And go to bed. Clowns chase me through my dreams till the morning. The morning greets me with sweaty disdain. I awake disoriented and more tired than I was before I went to sleep. After making sure that Brody is set to go to his father's house for the weekend, I head off for work. It's an uneventful workday, just how I liked. There's a gas station less than 2 miles from my house, so I stop to get some twisted teas and L&Ms. The cashier tells me to have a good night and be careful. I'd nod in response and open the door to leave. The sun starts to set early this time of year. When I walk out into the parking lot, the clear blue sky is already replaced with a pink and orange sunset. My car turns the last corner before home, and there it stands. The green-haired clown. He stands off in the woods staring at me. A white-gloved hand creeps up to wave and freezes, just like the clown from the 90s news report. My mind instantly takes me back there, and I struggle to keep the car on the road. It's difficult to perform such an adult task while reverting to such a childish emotional state. When I look in my rearview mirror, the clown is still at the edge of the woods, but is walking in the same direction that I'm driving. What's the point of all this? There are hundreds of people nearby to harass. Why choose me? I pull into the garage as quickly as I can and hit the button to lower the door. I hold my breath until I hear it close behind me. I run inside and quickly call the police. After the operator takes my information, she tells me there's been several clown reports lately, but so far, they've been harmless. She assures me they will investigate it before hanging up the phone. My mind races. I run through the house, checking all doors and windows to make sure they're locked. The woods at the edge of my yard look no different than they do any other night. The assumption's made that the police are on their way to check the neighborhood. So I start to relax a little, with the help of a drink or two. 4 teas in and it's cigarette time. Even though Brody's not with me this weekend, I still go to the garage to smoke. Because of me coming out here to smoke, my garage has become a place of comfort and relaxation to me. I sit on the steps and listen to the crackle of the tobacco taking flame. I've been smoking since I was 14. It's been the longest commitment of my entire life. I love everything about it, having only stopped once when I was pregnant with Brody. I catch myself humming a tune that I'm not too sure of. Halfway through my cigarette, a sound rings through the acoustics of the garage that doesn't belong. A click of a car door handle slices through the silence like a katana. There's barely any time to move or react. Tufts of erratic, electric green hair poke out through the top of the door as the figure stands to get out of the car. He walks toward me. He's cocking his head to one side, then the other, like a dog, sizing me up. He's cornering me in the direction leading away from the door leading inside. This is bad. What do you want? I shout at him. No answer. I take out my wallet and throw money at him. Here, just take this and go the fuck away, please. Again, no answer. And he's closer to me now than ever. There's not much room left behind me until I'm backed into a corner, and I have limited options. He stops about 4 feet away from me, reaches into his clown suit and pulls out a gun. Terror invades my skin like dry ice, burning me yet chilling my bones at the same time. Before he has time to shoot, I rush him with my knife. I'm able to tackle him to the ground and the gun falls from his hand. Something about the way the gun sounds when it falls bothers me. I see a rush of red spread under the floor beneath us. It doesn't make sense. The gun didn't go off. No one's been shot. Realizing it can only be one other option, I pull away from the figure in the clown suit. My knife has sliced clean through his chest, almost directly where his heart is. I can't feel a wrist pulse through all the frills of the cuffs of the clown suit, so I have to remove his mask to check his neck. Lots of emotions hit me at once, each one more heart-shattering than the one before. I scream. I sob. I claw at my face with lunacy at the horrific situation. Laying in front of me is a teenage boy. There's no pulse to be found because there's no life in his body. I've taken that away. The gun he pulled was a too realistic water pistol. I hug his blonde hair to my chest and stroke his lifeless face. The police will be here soon. I want you all to know how it happened before they take me away and everyone makes their own assumptions. I've always done my best to make sure to be a good mother. The saying goes that a parent should never have to bury their child. Can you imagine how I feel, being the one that actually killed theirs?
I know what you did, Professor Wiggins. The damning words stared out at her, black writing against the white screen, buried in a student's paper in the middle of a sentence analyzing Monday's reading. Inhaling a sharp breath, Alice peeled her eyes from her computer and looked from left to right, certain someone was playing a cruel trick on her. But all her vision embraced was the kitschy decor of her cat-themed home office. The ticking Kit Kat clock, imposing Le Chat Noir print, and Japanese waving cat ornament. These were the objects that induced happiness as she burnt the midnight oil grading papers. The words on the screen, however, failed to elicit any pleasure. Quite the opposite, in fact. Her hackles rose in consternation. She glanced at the name on the paper and tried to attach it to a face, but Jaden Adams evoked not even a spark of recognition. Back when she had to play the game of academia to impress the bigwigs and earn tenure, Alice had prided herself on learning her students' names quickly as possible. Times had changed, though. Here it was, mid-October, and she didn't have a clue who this Jaden character was. Maybe he hadn't turned anything in and wasn't attending class? Alice had given up taking attendance long ago. It wasn't required by Blackthorn University, so why should she bother? If students wanted to learn, they could come to class. She couldn't force anyone to show up or complete their work. That wasn't her job. After removing her glasses to rub her eyes, Alice clicked out of the document without making any comments. While she had initially loathed the switch from paper to electronic submissions, she found she could cycle through her grading way faster this way, copying and pasting canned comments that these kids probably weren't reading anyway. With that AI thingamajig her department chair kept harping on about, who knew if they were even writing their own papers anymore anyway? As she inched towards retirement, and she was close, with only one more year to go until she could collect full benefits, the less Alice cared. This younger generation wasn't worried about behaviorism or cognitive theories. They were too concerned about their Instagram followers and whatever was trending on TikTok. Alice had never bought into that social media nonsense. She was pretty disconnected from much of what was going on at the university these days. That was the cold, hard truth of the matter. She couldn't be bothered. But the words in Jaden's paper, these she cared about. Who was he? And more importantly, how did he know? That business had concluded long ago, the inquest having resulted in condolences rather than punishment. As far as anyone knew, Alice was blameless, a victim and unwilling pawn in what had spiraled into a senseless act of violence. And the one who did know exactly what Alice had done wasn't in a position to breathe a word of his involvement. In fact, he wasn't in a position to breathe at all. His life long since extinguished. Alice stifled a yawn as the students shuffled out of the classroom the next morning. She'd stayed up too late the night before, looking through Jaden's previous submitted work, and found him to be an average student without any reason to cause problems. But how could she give him a grade for a paper containing such an intrusive and threatening comment? While Alice's normal approach with troublemakers was to report them to the dean, she thought this case might need to be handled in a different, more confidential manner.
Dr. Wiggins, you said on my paper you wanted to see me?
A tall, thin boy slouched in front of the lectern, the elusive Jaden. Yes, though she longed to complete this encounter and retire back to the sanctuary of her office alone, where she was unlikely to be bothered, students from the next professor's class were already clamoring near the door to get in. Please follow me to my office so we can talk.
Okay, but
Alice's withering glare cut Jaden's words short, and he followed her into the hallway and up the stairs. Alice took her time, refusing to rush to keep up with this boy's long strides, fumbling to gather her office keys in her bag and settling her belongings once inside of her office. Let him wait. He'd caused her enough hassle as it was, and she would draw this out as long as necessary if it meant she could gain the other hand. Finally, she began. I suppose you know why I've called you in here? Jaden scratched at an angry red pimple on his chin, his face blanching.
I guess you didn't like my paper? I kind of struggled with the reading. You know, that Skinner guy is pretty tough. But I didn't cheat, if that's what you think honest.
He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing up and down like the strength tester at a carnival. It's what you wrote within your paper, what you hid there. I want to know why you would say something so utterly inappropriate. Though careful not to overplay her hand, Alice needed to find out what this cretin wanted. Jaden's heavy eyebrows arched into peaks.
Oh my god, did I use a bad word? If I did, I'm sorry. It must have been a typo.
Let's take a look at exactly what you wrote to me, and then let's talk about why, Alice said, her voice flinty. Logging into the learning management system, she opened up Jaden's latest offering and swung her monitor around to face him. Jaden squinted, mouthing the words as he reread the page.
Professor, I literally don't know what you're talking about.
Alice pursed her lips, exhaling through her nostrils. I don't understand how you would muster up the audacity to write such a thing and then not have the courage to talk to me about it. Spinning the monitor back around, she searched for the objectionable sentence, one she had unearthed so easily the night before. But it was gone, and all that remained offensive in Jaden's writing was his frequent use of run-on sentences. I don't understand how you did this. Alice heard the tremor in her voice.
I'm sorry, Professor, but I really don't know what you're talking about. I need to go to my next class. Is that okay? Are you okay? You need some water? Or do you want me to get someone?
As Alice met Jaden's gaze, rather than defiance, she saw compassion, maybe pity in his dark eyes. She waved him off. I'm sorry, she managed, her voice thin and strangled. I'll take another look at your paper and give you some feedback. Closing the door behind him and turning down the glaring fluorescent lights, Alice collapsed into her ergonomic chair to massage her temples, willing the growing pressure in her head to dissipate. She'd seen those words. She knew she had. Maybe Jaden had somehow retracted his earlier paper and resubmitted, but the submission window was closed. And he really had seemed genuine. Unless he was an accomplished actor, but she'd checked his student profile to see that he was a business major, not theater. Maybe a hacker was taunting her? Whatever it was, whoever was doing this, Alice needed to quell it. She was not going to allow this to happen to her. Not now, not after all these years. She called the IT help desk and explained that a student's paper had changed after he submitted it. No way. It couldn't have happened. The university invested in high-level security system to prevent data leaks. The man droned on, something about malware and ransomware. But Alice had trouble following. Is it possible that you were mistaken in what you saw, ma'am? Or could you at least be more specific about what you saw? It's Dr. Wiggins, and the wording itself is inconsequential, Alice hissed, annoyed by the second implication that morning that she was a person to be pitied. I know the paper was changed. Well, Dr. Wiggins, perhaps you're right. Perhaps there's something new going on. A glitch in the system? Have a good day now. He hung up before Alice could say anything else. A glitch in the system. She'd heard those words before. She'd even used them herself to explain the unexplainable. Long ago. Having experienced enough nonsense for one day, Alice was ready to go home. Even though she technically had office hours for another hour and a half, students rarely showed up. Alice didn't bother including her availability on her syllabus. The ones who really wanted help could contact her, and the others didn't deserve her time. A department meeting was scheduled for later in the afternoon, but she doubted she'd be missed. Many of these younger professors, with their woke ways and silly student-centered approaches, failed to appreciate the wisdom and experience she brought to the table. Just because times changed didn't mean she had to reinvent the way she taught, and she was sick of hearing about it. Who cared about her low evaluations? She was a tenured full professor with nothing to worry about other than coasting to retirement. Who was going to give her any trouble when there were so many others trying to rock the boat? Unless, of course, someone really was trying to bring up the past. Now that could be an issue. Alice needed a break from the stress, so she fixed herself a salad and a cup of chamomile tea before settling on the couch to watch soap operas for most of the afternoon. Near dinner, she summoned the energy to feed her 2 black cats, Suspect and Criminal, and opened her laptop to check her email. She wanted an excuse in hand just in case she was chastised for skipping that department meeting. And there it was, almost like before, a threat sandwiched in between the words of an otherwise innocuous sentence from her department chair. While I'm sure there is a reason for your absence, please remember that monthly department meetings are mandatory for all. You will be punished, Professor, for what you did to the psychology faculty, Alice, and I hope you will provide me with advance notice if you must miss a scheduled meeting in the future. Alice's eyes widened. Without the earlier incident, she might have thought that her chair had mixed feelings about her truancy, but 2 messages couldn't be a coincidence. Ralph was a spineless man who was only chair because no one else wanted the position, and Alice doubted he had punished anyone in his life for failing to follow orders. Could this be about something else? A silly prank from a disgruntled and technologically savvy student? Maybe she should look over other members of her roster to see if there were any computer science majors in her Psych 101 class. But if anyone wanted to cause trouble for her, there was one event and one event only that would destroy her if the truth came out. Alice remembered how it had all transpired over 30 years ago, back when her hair was blonde versus gray, her figure years from the inevitable middle-age spread. She could picture the teased bags, pegged jeans, and flannel shirts of her students, hear the grunge and R&B music blasting from ubiquitous boomboxes peppering the quad. There was so much pressure to establish herself as an academic back in those early days at the university. With classes to teach, committees on which to serve, and students to advise, Alice hadn't completed much scholarship at the beginning of her career. When her research study didn't provide statistically significant results, she knew it hampered her chances of publication. So she fudged some data. Tweaked it, more like it. Just transposed a few numbers for a bigger effect size. No one would ever notice. Alice had admitted to herself back in her grad school days that she didn't have either the smarts or drive to become a top researcher in her field, but she needed to publish somewhere. A third or fourth tier journal would be good enough to help her earn tenure, but probably wouldn't scrutinize her research to the same degree as a more prestigious publication. And no one would have been the wiser if not for her meticulous undergraduate research assistant, Tommy. A senior psych major assigned to Alice for an independent study, had been a godsend when it came to helping code the data, and Alice had come to rely on him for his proofreading skills. What she wasn't expecting was how seriously he took his responsibilities.
Dr. Wiggins, you didn't send the article to the journal yet, did you?
Tommy, dark circles under his eyes, had knocked on her office door, her original office at Blackthorn University, barely bigger than a broom closet, almost as soon as she arrived at work on that crucial morning. Alice rearranged her face into a mask of surprise. He couldn't know. Why do you ask? Yes, I sent it. Tommy plopped his backpack right on her desk and began rummaging through it, pulling out folders and papers.
I kept thinking that something was off. I was laying in bed last night thinking about it, thinking something got messed up somewhere. Look.
He pointed his finger at a table, listing a smaller effect size than that which had been made into the final draft of her manuscript. Well, that can't be right, Tommy. The results were much higher than that. I reviewed them myself. Maybe the printer messed up, or there was a glitch in the system. You know all the trouble we've had with technology. They went back and forth for a bit, Alice claiming that the papers were innocent, Tommy explaining he didn't want to get her in trouble for submitting false data. Tommy, I hope you're not insinuating that I'm doing anything unethical, Alice said. She stood up from her desk, back ramrod straight. She would not let him destroy the meager foundation of her scholarship. Hand over those papers. As an undergraduate student rather than the principal investigator, you shouldn't have those in your possession. She extended her hand.
Dr. Wiggins, I'm trying to help you. That's all I want to do.
Tommy said, his expression pained. Alice grabbed Tommy's backpack, extracting the rest of the folders and papers and clutching them to her chest. Tommy reached out to retrieve them, yanking hard, and Alice fell to the floor, her head thwacking against the side of her desk.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Tommy chanted, dropping to his hands and knees to help her. With her back turned, he didn't see Alice's mouth curl into a smile, but he heard her scream, as did everyone else in the office suite. In the descending chaos, Alice watched, makeshift ice pack on her head, as the campus police officer walked Tommy out in handcuffs. Her colleagues hung around, mouths agape at the skirmish. Though the officer had taken Tommy's backpack, Alice had swept the printouts out of sight under her desk. She would shred them later. In the investigation that followed, Alice kept her story simple. The student demanded I credit his name as a co-author on the paper, but he hadn't contributed much more than proofreading and data entry, so I told him that was inappropriate. Unfortunately, he became violent. As far as Alice knew, Tommy didn't accuse her of anything, or if he did, no one took it seriously. Even though Alice opted not to file charges, Tommy was immediately suspended from the university, his scholarship revoked. A formal board hearing had been scheduled to review Tommy's case and determine whether he should be expelled from Blackthorn, but the hearing was canceled. There was no need to determine Tommy's future. Within a week of the incident, Tommy's landlord, having heard what sounded like a gunshot, keyed into his off-campus apartment to find Tommy lying in the bed, his brains splattered against the wall. His suicide note was short, to the point, and grammatically correct, if not inventive in semantics.
I'm deeply sorry for the trouble I've caused.
Despite how shaken she was from all of it, Alice published her research study and went on to receive tenure. The situation was tragic, of course, but she couldn't take responsibility for Tommy's violent actions. Not the push that resulted in her mild concussion, and certainly not for his rash decision to end his young life. Having tossed and turned all night, thinking about the disturbing messages she had received, Alice slept through her alarm and didn't have time to put on makeup, style her hair, or drink her tea. Alice walked in a daze across campus, failing to notice the golden-hued leaves fluttering to the ground in the gentle breeze. For Alice, there was little beauty to be found, only danger and ugliness. She went straight to her classroom, not even stopping at her office. If her students noticed her distraction or unkempt appearance, no one said a word. Then again, they were a particularly disengaged bunch of freshmen, few of whom were even psych majors. Most of these kids were there to satisfy general election credits, not to actually learn. Clicking to the next slide of her PowerPoint, Alice continued instruction in her monotone voice. She'd given this lecture so many times she could recite it by memory. She glanced up at her slide out of habit, and that's when she saw it, projected on her screen for all of her students to see. A crime scene photograph of Tommy's suicide. His long limbs splayed, head tilted back, jaws slack, and eyes vacant. Tommy's ruined body slumped in bed in front of a wall, slicked with blood and gray, sponge-like chunks of his brain matter. But worst of all, in what she recalled as Tommy's careful, cramped handwriting, were the words that accompanied the photograph. "Look what you made me do, Dr. Wiggins." Gasping in horror, Alice grabbed the remote control, turned off the projector, and faced her students. Most of them had their heads down, buried in their phones. "Class is dismissed," she yelled, grabbing her purse and running from the room as fast as she could. She didn't have a plan, but she needed to get away. That's all she cared about now. She needed to get home where she felt safe. It was a short drive home, thank goodness, but Alice seemed to get stuck behind every red light. She floored it at the intersection once it turned green, not checking whether the coast was clear. She never saw the tractor trailer coming and barely felt the impact as her car and body were crushed by the much larger vehicle. She didn't hear the screech of metal or her own final scream cut short as her spinal cord separated from her body. Later, once the wreckage was cleared, the policeman took statements from the witnesses. "I was right behind her, officer. I saw the light turn green, but the other light hadn't turned red or even yellow. They were both green at the same time, I swear. It wasn't the trucker's fault," a witness said. He pointed at the portly man being treated by an EMT in the back of an ambulance. The officer wrote down the witness's statement. "Must have been a glitch in the system," he said.
So I found this Santa Claus card last night. It blew right into my ankle as I was walking around the downtown area of my city. The colors were faded, but not enough to where I couldn't make out the letters and numbers. The background was the color of cardboard, with bright crimson text. I think I'll be able to remember it until the day I die. Those are all the visuals I'll give you. The last thing I need is for someone to go out searching for this fucking thing. Well, I thought nothing of it at first. If we had a dime for every time we reached that sentence, right? However, as these things sometimes do, it began to nag at me over time. It chewed at the corners of my subconscious, like a rat trapped in a plaster cage. I can remember the home I lived in as a child. My parents tried their hardest, but we could always hear the rats in the wall, little chitters and squeaks throughout the bustle of the day and the silence of the night. Well, that's what it felt like to me. Little squeaked whispers of who could answer if I called that number. It's a wonder my husband didn't notice.
"Hey, babe.
My husband Bobby greeted me that evening.
Did we get any Christmas cards today?"
"No thanks, I'm not hungry. Can't seem to find my appetite this week,"
"What?"
he replied incredulously.
"I asked you if we got any Christmas cards in the mail today."
"Just advertisements for death," I responded distractedly. He gave me a strange look. "Life insurance junk mail. Besides, why would we be getting cards already?" I added. Finally, after one too many times of Bobby catching me zoning out in blank thought, I told him about the card. I cringed in anticipation of his response, waiting for him to tell me to spend my time focusing on more important things like dusting or the laundry. Hell, I half expected him to scold me for picking items up off a street, as a parent would a curious child. That's not what happened, though. Quite the opposite. His eyes lit up in wild excitement over puffed-out cheeks as he drew in a hit of the joint we were smoking. Don't judge, medical marijuana is a wondrous thing. But anyway, he insisted almost at once that we call the number.
Come on, Maggie,
He pleaded.
what's the harm? It's probably disconnected anyway. It's too early for calls with Santa. We just hit November, for fuck's sake. Besides, we've had such a rough year.
My face fell at his last sentence, though I tried desperately not to show it. No, I replied, a bit more sternly than I intended. Why don't you call then, huh, hotshot? I razzed him. He threw his hands up in mock defeat as a smile blossomed across his lips.
Oh no, Missy. You aren't gonna get me.
He declared. My face scrunched up in confusion as I struggled to figure out what he meant. Luckily for us, 7 years of marriage has taught him to read me like a picture book. He continued.
It would be just my luck this is some kind of sex thing. I call, and Amanda Hot to Trot answers the line, and boom. It'll be Couch City for me until Christmas is long past.
He half joked. So I pulled out my phone and dialed the number only to shut him up. It began to ring, much to my dismay. A huge chunk of me desperately hoped the number was no longer in service. Muffled jingle bells played over the line as a pre-recorded greeting rang out.
Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas! Thank you for calling Santa's Workshop. Our system is not set up to accommodate speakerphones to avoid prying ears of boys and girls. We hope you understand. Please, press 1 to leave your wish list information, or press 2 to check your naughty or nice status.
I looked at my husband incredulously as he gestured to me to keep going. I reluctantly hovered my thumb over the speaker button before pressing it firmly, along with the number 2. I figured, what the hell, right? I was surprised to hear a live voice come through the phone, one that sounded frantic and afraid.
Megan Richmond?
The urge to render myself out of Bobby's earshot kept me from responding promptly.
Call back when Bobby's out of the house. It's imperative.
What? Wait, who the hell is this? I demanded. Is this some kind of joke? Someone's sick idea of a holiday prank? Thanksgiving just passed. The line disconnected. Crazy as I thought it was, I was very much flirting with the idea of following the woman's instructions. I mean, she knew my husband by name. However, when he asked me what I'd heard, I lied, saying it was indeed a sick sex thing. I've always liked playing with fire, I guess, no matter how many times I got burned. I had the next day off, as fate would have it, while Bobby worked. I want to say that maybe if he'd called in sick that day, things would have been different. But I don't think that's true in my soul.
I know what's on the top shelf in the left cupboard. Push far in the back to keep out of mind's eye.
My protein shake mix? While I acknowledge there's truth in your statement, I hardly see what that has to do with the naughty or nice list.
I haven't finished. Why don't you be a good girl for Santa and dump the contents of that canister out into the trash, but make sure you hold a colander under it first. If you look at the pebbles within, you'll know what I mean.
The line disconnected. My mind reeled at the cryptic words. Pebbles within? I thought wryly. Fucking ridiculous. But seeing as I didn't have anything better to do, I decided to humor the mysterious voice. Dirt-smudged slippers shuffled across the tile floor as I made my way to the kitchen. The protein powder haunted me more with every step, as well as waves of tormented recollections. I wasn't ready to look at the protein powder. The significance it held to a happier time was still too much to bear. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes like country nettles as I gingerly opened the cupboard door, and I squeezed them shut in defiance. To no avail. The veil shrouding the events of the past 8 months hit me like a tidal wave of regret. The protein powder was something Bobby had bought to help with my nutrients. My morning sickness was so bad, and the only thing I craved was chocolate milkshakes. That wasn't the healthiest option. Bobby used to joke about their amniotic fluid being a full-service Baskin-Robbins. So he got me the powder as a compromise. It took a while to get used to, but it wasn't so bad after the initial bitter and chalky taste. You noticed I said morning sickness, and it wasn't an error. I should have a 6-week-old baby at this point. But if you hadn't gathered by now, I don't. Spontaneous abortion, they called it. Ain't that a bitch? Spontaneous is appropriate, sure. But the word abortion implies it was something I'd done by choice. And that wasn't what happened here. Bobby and I had been ecstatic to find out we were pregnant. It was a surprise, not something we had planned or even talked about much. But we were thrilled nonetheless. The powder tumbled into the silver colander, resulting in a pigpen cloud of dust to assail my senses. It smelled much like it had tasted, and the connection made my stomach turn. This all made no sense to me. Once the canister had been emptied of its contents, the colander soon followed suit. My eyes widened in shock to see specks of green granules settle to the bottom of the cylindrical container, just as predicted. My husband came into view the moment I turned my head to call his name. Bobby? What is this? I quavered through trembling lips.
What in God's name? It's bullshit is what it is, Meg. I'm calling their company right fucking now.
His expression became irate with impatience, and I could recognize the voice on the receiving end as an automated recording.
You know,
he seethed, jamming a number into the phone that corresponded to the appropriate option given.
This happened to my aunt once. She found shards of glass in my cousin's baby food. Got free Gerber for a year. As if that would have helped anything.
I won't take you through the rest of the conversation. Let's just say they offered us something more than a year-long supply of protein powder. The company threw out $signs when they found out I'd been pregnant at the time of ingestion, but wasn't anymore. We mailed them a sample of what we'd found with some 4x6 glossy print photos for further proof, and they sent us a check. The amount was more than fair, so I didn't even think of contacting a lawyer. My husband's eyes widened with shock as he saw the amount they gave us.
It's gonna be such a Merry Christmas,
he exclaimed.
What a miracle.
Though I was thankful for the financial blessing, I'd hardly call what we had been through a miracle. My face must have reflected as much because Bobby gripped my hands in his. The look on his face was compassionate but stern, meaning he had something important to say.
Hey, honey, I know what you're thinking, but I promise this had nothing to do with the baby. I know you think I've blocked it, but I haven't. I've thought a lot about this and...
He hesitated before continuing.
You were so sick for the entire pregnancy. That powder was the only thing that you could eat. I mixed it in with everything. Cottage cheese, ice cream, yogurt, peanut butter. As much as I hated to, you name it. Something was wrong far before you began eating it, sweetheart. This money really is a miracle.
His words caused a seed that my subconscious planted to begin to sprout. A miracle, he said. Well, I would have never known if I hadn't called that damn number, I realized. Bobby called out the next day, a choice any man in his situation would have been tempted with. Shit, I had to talk him out of quitting altogether more than once. This new bundle of Benjamins wasn't enough to live on by any means, but it was more than enough to get us far ahead. My husband and I both keeping our jobs would help us stay there. But anyway, I was distracted for almost the entire day, just itching for a chance to be alone and see what other messages the number held for me. So you bet your biscuits my fingers were busy dialing the moment my husband's car was out of view as he drove off to work the following day. It rang longer than it had the 2 previous times I had called, and I was surprised at how much that worried me. These phone calls had so far brought nothing but good things. I had come to think of them as holiday premonitions from a modern-day fortune cookie service. A sigh of relief escaped me as the automated service came on the line. I jammed down the number 2 without even listening to all of the options.
Oh, hello there. I knew we'd be hearing from you soon.
I ignored the remark. This whole thing was cryptic as fuck inside and out. To try to make sense of every little detail would only waste valuable time.
Santa Claus wouldn't steer you wrong on Christmas, now would he?
But it's not Christmas anymore, I stammered. It's almost the end of December.
A woman named Bonnie Hinman has her sights set on your husband, my dear. And we can't have that, can we? Good boys and girls honor their commitments. Get rid of the problem.
What do you mean, get rid of her? I'm not a mafioso, for Christ's sake.
Tisk now, Megan. Do you think the Lord has anything to do with this?
My imagination ran wild with every devious possibility I could create. Bobby had been working more than usual. My seasonal depression mixed with the time change had me more exhausted than expected in the evenings, meaning I hadn't been waiting up for him like I usually would. Why would he beg me to quit, though, if he was using it as a reason to fuck around? The life insurance policy that I initially thought was garbage flashed into the recesses of my recollection. A grimace infected my lips as I remembered tearing it up before throwing it away. The stroke of midnight found me tiptoeing into our living room to log into my husband's laptop. I'd gone through his phone earlier. It didn't feel good, trust me, and I found nothing. Maybe his email address would hold a clue to this Vonnie woman and what exactly she wanted with my husband. As luck would have it, I was on the right track. Though one shouldn't use the word luck when describing anything occurring in my particular situation. One single email stood out from all the others, with the email address vhinman@redacted.
Bobby, I covered your ass, now you cover mine. I can still ruin your family, the pieces you haven't ruined yourself, with one phone call. I want my money. And don't give me any of that women scorned bullshit either.
Intrusive thoughts swarmed my brain like a freshly disturbed ant's nest as I decorated the inside of the house for Christmas. In the end, I could only come up with one logical explanation, albeit far-fetched. Vonnie and Bobby must have been fucking. I intertwined twinkling lights above the mantel, shuddering at how their bodies must have also at one point been intertwined. Things must have become too real for her when I became pregnant, and she threatened to break it off. So, in turn, Bobby must have poisoned my protein shakes to rid himself of the latest issue between him and his whore. Maybe it wasn't enough for her when I lost the baby. Perhaps it was too late by then. He must have given her quite the sob story to borrow that settlement money. How could he do this to me, to us? What's more, I had felt like absolute shit this entire week. Initially, I'd passed it off as nervous anxiety due to the odd situation. But what if he wanted more than the baby out of the way this time? What if now he tried to poison me? He had been on me quite a bit about eating. I had just about driven myself mad when Bobby walked in the door unexpectedly, a smile perched on his traitorous, lying face. He held something in his right hand, and I balked at what it was. Out of all the things, all the goddamn things in the entire world he could have come home with, it had to be this. It seemed almost poetic. As much as I wanted to act instinctively, I knew this all had to be done very carefully. I stood in silence as he held out his peace offering.
I braved the storm for you, Maggie, and I got you a mixer. I risked life, limb, and airway just for you.
He joked.
The new Culver's flavor of the day was Reese's Chunk Peanut Butter Swirl with candies inside.
I smiled gratefully before gripping the milkshake in both hands. I took a small, gratifying sip to appease him, if nothing else. God knows I wasn't in the mood for sweets after all the shit I'd endured. It was time. "I put up some mistletoe, babe," I exclaimed, strolling over to the center of our living room. I morphed my lips into a pucker and stood on tiptoe in anticipation. Our lips met, and what was at first a simple kiss quickly evolved into something much more carnal. I opened my mouth wide, smearing my ice cream-coated tongue over his as many times as possible between breaths. His eyes shot open as realization dawned on his dick-brain mind. He raised his arms to pull away, but I'd had a tight grip on his twisted undershirt. With a force of strength that I didn't know I had, I slammed his head against the wall, hard enough to make it bleed. I wasted no time forcing his mouth open as he slid to the linoleum floor. I squeezed the cup over his face until the contents smothered the inside of his mouth, nose, and eyes. The skin pulled taut over his face as it began to bloat, the distortion making him quickly unrecognizable. He raised his hands futilely to claw at my face, becoming more desperate for breath with each passing second.
Why?
He gasped. "I know about you. Vonnie, the powder, everything. Well, now you can be together after she's dead," I sobbed. He shook his head violently in defiance, but it was too late for any words to emerge. I knew we didn't even have an EpiPen. I always told him he needed to be more responsible, especially his health. He was deathly allergic, you see. My fingers fumbled to dial 911 on my phone. I sobbed in hysterics, screaming that there had been a terrible accident and my husband needed medical attention right away, feigning concern the best I could. Every time I struggled for the much-needed tears the situation called for, I just thought of our baby and the memories they never got to make. I waited with bated breath for police and medical attendants to arrive. Then I did something that I ashamedly hadn't done in a long time. I squeezed my eyes shut as my hands came together in desperate prayer. I prayed to God, Jesus, Santa Claus, and anyone who would listen. The Santa hotline had done so well at turning my misfortunes into miracles, and I just needed one last, teeny little one.
I've never done anything like this before. Never sat down with a man opposite in this capacity. The anticipation is real and tangible. He keeps looking over at me, and I don't know how to react. Should I smile? Would a smile be too forward? Should I just look back, meet his gaze? Then what? Where does it go from there? Should I introduce myself? Maybe he's waiting for me to break the ice? Should I do something with my hands? They're just sitting here, limp and useless. My legs are aching. Maybe I should shift my position. Would that be too weird? Do people do that? I really shouldn't. It might give off the wrong signal. Do I do anything with my eyebrows, though? That's something I've definitely seen people do. Like, raise one, maybe? Or both? Oh no. He's still looking at me. I don't know what to do.
Hello,
He says. Oh no. How do I respond to that? Can I apply with a simple hello back, or should I elaborate? Maybe I don't need to say anything? Maybe it would just be enough to smile or wave my hand or gesture somehow? I have to do something.
I can't just sit here staring at him. That would just be too weird. A combination of a facial expression, bodily pose, and an alluring greeting would be perfect. But if I mess it up, it could quite possibly have the opposite effect of what I want. Hi, I reply. That didn't seem right at all. I can tell by the way the expression on his face changes that I screwed up somehow, that I misread the signals. Damn it! Why do I always do this? Why can't I just be normal? Why can't I instinctively react to these social cues?
Do you want anything to drink?
He asks. I was dreading this question. I am quite thirsty, but the information that could be extracted from the essence of the answer is theoretically limitless. Hot or cold? Lukewarm? Size? Shape? Color? Fizzled? People can't really fathom how much a single choice like this can reveal about a person. I want him to think I'm interesting, sophisticated, mysterious, elegant. A person who has seen it all, yet still willing to explore, grow, and evolve. Someone that can challenge and question, capable of both receiving and giving creative. Someone that can challenge and question, capable of both receiving and giving criticism. Water? I say. Was that right? It's neutral, healthy even. But could it be defined as boring, dull, lacking in imagination? Did I just blow it? Was this it? I can't move. I'm physically unable to move. It's just too much to process. Too much to read into. I desperately try to identify the expression on his face. It seems serious, yet intrigued. Cold, yet inquisitive. Maybe there's still hope?
So,
He says.
let's talk about the bodies we found in your freezer.
A mother's grief is something unimaginable. Something fundamentally impossible to fathom unless you have had first-hand experience. It isn't something I understood when it happened in my family. To my mother wasn't a fragile woman. It just wasn't in her nature. She was so strong-willed, firm, and fierce. Something that I had always lacked. It wasn't until the death of my brother that I noticed a drastic change in her. A terrifying change. My brother Michael was always my mother's favorite. He was the apple of her eye. I always came last when it concerned her. A secondary child. One that she probably wouldn't have birthed given a second chance. She never made me feel like that, but deep down, I've always known. Was I jealous? Maybe a little, yeah. But it wasn't like my mother never loved me. She did. Just not as much as she loved Michael. Michael died when he was just 21 years old. A tragic, gruesome death. Too young to die, everyone said. He had so much to live for. It was true, he did. His death was macabre. Something that you don't hear about every day. It left a mark on us all. But it stained my mother's soul the most. It knots my stomach just thinking about it. About Michael. But I think it's something that must be told. Must be shared, and I long to understand why it affected my mother the way it did. Grief touches people differently. I'm aware of that, but the way she was acting wasn't normal. It was downright strange. It was a Wednesday, I think, the day Michael died. The day that my mother's life changed. I don't know the intricate details that surrounded his death, but I was told enough. My mother discovered his body in his one-bedroom flat. She found him hanging from a light fixture in his bedroom, all limp and rigid. His head was hanging on by a thread, lopsided. His mouth was slightly ajar with blood trickling from the sides. The most disturbing thing about it was that he was almost flayed. His flesh was barely attached to his bones. It hung off of him like an ill-fitted suit, like it didn't belong to him. We didn't know what could have done something like that. We didn't want to know. His death was investigated, of course. Police were baffled, naturally. No one could figure out what happened. Some freak accident? A grisly murder? Either they had a dangerous killer on the loose or Michael did that to himself. I was inclined to go with the former. I was scared for a long time, had nightmares daily, thinking that whoever did this would come after me. I feared for my life. My mother? As I said, she became withdrawn and aloof. She spent weeks, months, shut away in her bedroom, only venturing out for necessities. My mother didn't cry. She didn't do anything that you would consider normal, really. I couldn't reach her. No one could. Things became even stranger when we discovered that Michael's body had gone missing. He'd only been in the ground a few days. The dirt had barely dried before he was plucked from the earth. No one knew why. The police were still preoccupied with finding who or what did that to my brother in the first place, so the fact that his body went missing seemed to drop down their priority list. Life was in turmoil. I lived in constant fear. The terror attached itself to me like some sort of parasite, making a home deep in my heart. I worried for my mother, though. Worried what this would do to her. She refused to see me every time I attempted a futile visit and wouldn't answer my calls. So one day, I decided to just turn up unannounced. I knew where my mother kept her spare key. I hated to invade her privacy like this, but I was worried sick, terrified, and I needed to make sure that she was okay. That she hadn't met the same grisly fate that Michael did. I didn't know why I feared that, but I did. My mother's small house was eerily quiet and dark. When I stepped in, I felt the cold seep into the pores of my skin. It made the hairs on my arms stand on edge. The kitchen and living room were shrouded in darkness, but I knew where my mother was. I knew she'd be in her bedroom, doing whatever it was she had been doing the last few months. I gingerly made my way upstairs, the fear gripping me tighter than ever. There was a faint light emanating from my mother's bedroom, illuminating the gloomy hallway. It almost looked like candlelight. I stood outside the door for a few minutes, gathering my manic thoughts. I knocked on the door, faintly at first. Mom? Nothing. No answer. I knocked again, much louder this time. That was when I heard something stirring within. I touched the handle. It cooled my sweaty palm. It was unlocked. I stepped into the room and recoiled at the repugnant sight that greeted me. The smell assaulted my nostrils. It was the smell of rotting flesh mixed in with the sweat and stale dirt. Michael lay in the middle of the floor, surrounded by dripping candles. My mother sat beside him, her hands deep inside his open chest cavity. "Mom!" I screamed. "What are you doing?" She turned her head and looked at me.
Her small, fragile face was lathered in blood, and she smiled. A wide smile that stretched from ear to ear. She removed her hand from inside Michael, and in her palm, she held a shriveled-up heart, and it was beating. She lifted it to her parched lips and bit into it. The bright red liquid seeped out of her mouth as she chewed the stretchy flesh. Her eyes were glassy, outright deranged.
I'm going to bring him back, Sarah. He's going to live inside me, and I will give birth to him once more. It will happen. He said it will. He said it will.
It's safe to say I called the police. My mother was declared mentally unstable and committed to an institution. A mental breakdown, they called it. Complete and utter fracture of the psyche. She was a suspect in Michael's murder for a while, but eventually, that was ruled out. They still haven't found who did that to him. I visit her often, as much as I can, really. Recently, though, I've discovered something disturbing about my mother. Something I can't quite get my head around. And in fact, no one else can either. Yesterday, when I visited her, I saw that she was pregnant.
When Haley Abbott was 6 years old, she discovered she could leave her body. Stuck at the fabric store with her mother instead of curled up on the couch watching Saturday morning cartoons with her dog, Haley was miserable. She hated fabric stores, hated how her mother spent hours caressing the brightly colored bolts beneath her fingertips. "We'll just pop in and out," her mother would say. But then she'd start conversations about quilting techniques with the ladies in the store, and Haley would end up sitting on the dusty linoleum for hours on end, aching to leave. She didn't know what a crazy 9-patch pattern was and didn't care about backing versus basting. It was so boring. Staring at her open-eyed body propped against the set of shelves in the flannel section, she figured she had fallen asleep, but Haley could see everything around her clearly. It wasn't like her regular dreams, where objects looked fuzzy, as if she were wearing goggles. She even noticed a fleck of dried ketchup on her other self's chin. When she rubbed her own face, she felt the dry, flaky texture. It seemed wrong somehow, seeing herself this way. She searched for her mother at the back of the store, still chatting away. Haley knew she wasn't supposed to interrupt when grown-ups were talking, but she did it anyway, wanting that creepy feeling to go away. "Are you almost done, Mom?" But her mother kept talking like she wasn't even there. Haley reached for her sleeve, but watched as her fingers slithered right through. Her chest tightened, as if she were underwater and needed to come up for air. She felt a pulling sensation, a frantic tug to her other self. Haley allowed herself to be dragged back to the flannel section and poured into the body like pancake batter onto a griddle. She opened and closed her fist, making sure both selves were working together as one. "Mom?" Her voice, loud and quavering, must have indicated her distress, for Haley's mother rushed to her side. Crouching on her knees, frowning, she felt Haley's forehead. "Are you okay, honey? You look pale." Haley was a good girl who tried to tell the truth. But when she opened her mouth, all she said was, "I think I need something to eat." On the car ride home, belly full of ice cream, Haley thought about what had happened and decided she couldn't tell, even though it scared her. Especially because it scared her. The next time Haley left her body, she was in 3rd grade, taking an oral spelling test and trying to picture the word homonym. Her teacher, Miss Goldstein, had a poster behind her desk with that word written on it, but Haley couldn't see it in her mind's eye. Then there she was, staring at it. Haley flushed red, waiting for the teacher's reprimand for getting up during a test and for cheating. But Miss Goldstein simply gave the next word, repetition. Haley's other self sat at her desk, unmoving, not writing a word. She didn't want Miss Goldstein to notice. She rushed back into her body and resumed her exam. By middle school, Haley had learned some control, though she still slipped out of her body accidentally at times. Often, when distracted or upset, she could now leave at will, but she remained careful. Once she had gone wandering, for that's what she called it, while watching television with her mother. She knew no one could see or hear her, and she had built up endurance to go for longer times and farther distances from her body. She passed through the door and glided down the street, moving lighter and more gracefully than when in her body. She watched the late summer sunset, appreciating the creamy sherbet colors bleeding into each other, before heading back inside. But when she re-entered her house, her mother's screams filled the room. She jumped back into her body. "Mom, stop! What are you doing?" Haley wrenched her mother's arms away. "Haley! I thought you were dead! I called 911. Her mother spoke into the phone. "She's okay. I don't know what happened." Yes, I will follow up with the doctor." "I'm fine. I must have fallen asleep." "Your eyes were open. They were about to have me do mouth to mouth." With her mother's face a tear-stained mass of anguish, Haley's guilt consumed her. From then on, she limited her wandering. She'd leave her room with the door locked and music playing. If her mother knocked on the door, she'd have a few minutes leeway to say she hadn't heard her, an interlude to do whatever she wanted, with no one the wiser. Haley's power enthralled her. Sashaying outside in the dead of winter in her pajamas, she didn't feel cold when wandering and left no footprints in the snow. Nighttime was best, for her mother was less prone to check on her, and Haley adored watching the nocturnal creatures. The deer, guileless to any presence, munching away on the grass, while the wolf stayed in the shadows under the moonlit sky, waiting for the opportunity to begin his hunt. Only Haley, undetected, could view nature's majesty this way. She stayed away longer and longer, heading back when her lungs started begging for air and the tide pulled her back to her body. Haley wondered if there was some great purpose as to why she could come and go as she pleased, a reason she could shed her flesh like a winter coat. But she had no insight and no one to talk to. Her wandering was just something she could do, like how some people could wiggle their ears. She gave up questioning and focused on enjoying her secret, until she was caught. The Russos lived a few doors down from the Abbott's house. Haley wasn't really listening when her mother told her about the elder Mrs. Russo moving in. Haley had babysat for the family a few times, but little Charlie threw terrible tantrums, so she pretended to be busy unless in dire need of cash. As Haley sailed through the neighborhood over a sea of fallen leaves one autumn evening, the old lady standing on the lawn seemed to look straight at her. By now, Haley was accustomed to this discomfort. She didn't bat an eyelid. "I see you, Haley Abbott." Mrs. Russo's voice, full of gravel and razor blades, reverberated out to her. Haley slid to a halt. How did this woman know her name? Better yet, how could she see her? "You can see me? You can hear me?" Haley approached with caution. She couldn't believe it, not after all these years going unnoticed. "Clear as daylight. Better than my ruined eyes can see from my actual body. She gestured toward the house with her thumb. I'm inside, lying in my hospital bed. Now that I can't walk, can't really do anything, I like getting outside for a change of scenery, and I pretend I can breathe this fresh air. Meanwhile, my earthly lungs are chock full of fluid. Haley gaped at her. There was so much to ask. She wanted to feast on the old woman's wisdom like it was a big, thick steak. Cat got your tongue, girl? If you've got something to say, out with it. I don't know how much longer I have. Haley didn't know if Mrs. Russo meant she'd need to go back to her body soon, or if she was suggesting that she was dying. She didn't want to be insensitive, but she wanted more information from this single person who could understand her gift. You wander, Mrs. Russo? Ever since I was a girl, but I call it traveling. And call me Agnes. She smiled, eyes gleaming. You? Since I was 6. Haley started blurting it all out to the stranger, spilling the secret she had kept from the first time in the fabric store to her longer and more recent trips, nearly 12 years later. She said so much so fast that she almost didn't notice the familiar feeling, the constricted lungs and wrenching back to her body. Agnes knew. Of course she did. Young lady, this has been a pleasant gab session, but I can tell you need to go. Tomorrow, same time, same place? Haley nodded, regretting how she had monopolized their conversation, wishing she had asked Agnes about her own experiences. They met the next day, and the next, and Haley remembered to listen rather than share. Agnes understood Haley's need for guidance. Look, sister, I'll tell you what I know. I've been traveling for 70-odd years, but the doctor says my days are numbered. Somebody might as well benefit from all this knowledge. If that person is you, and I can help you, great. Agnes told stories about leaving her body for hours on end, giving Haley tips on building up strength so she could do it too. She regaled Haley with tales of going backstage with the Beatles and standing by as Queen Elizabeth ate her dinner. I had to haul my earthly body to England first, but the sky's the limit once you park your carcass near Buckingham Palace. I boogied right past those guards with their big silly hats. I had a ball. Agnes sighed, a small smile playing at her lips. What I wouldn't give to be in your shoes now, ready to start your journey. Alive with possibility, Haley planned events in her future. As soon as she graduated from Blackthorn High next month, before she started college, she could do whatever she liked. What great fun it would be, enjoying life in a way almost no one else could. Following Agnes's example, she could go anywhere, do anything. Walk through every velvet rope to the most exclusive celebrity parties if she wanted. Or maybe slide down Niagara Falls or the Grand Canyon. One day, at their normal meeting time, Agnes wasn't waiting for her. Panic coursed through Haley's veins. Had she passed? Agnes had said she wasn't long for this world. Haley didn't want to intrude, but she peeked into the Russo's house to catch if her friend was okay. There lay Agnes in the hospital bed, looking so much weaker and smaller than how Haley knew her. Her eyes, cloudy with glaucoma, were open, but Haley knew her friend was still alive. The machine at her bedside registered a weak heartbeat. If Agnes was out wandering, where had she gone? She was always there for Haley. They were there for each other, the only two people who understood this special talent. Haley left the Russos and searched the neighborhood. Maybe Agnes was out on a nature walk, but she couldn't find her anywhere. Her chest burning, Haley headed home, saddened by the lack of connection. She passed through her front door and into her bedroom, anxious to get back into her body. But her body was no longer lying in bed. Instead, Haley gasped in horror to see herself sitting at her desk, laptop open to a travel site, singing along with Spotify to Hey Jude. Haley tried to climb back into this moving, blinking being, her body, but there was no room. Though her lungs gulped for air, Haley realized she wasn't feeling the gravitational tug to come back to her body. Instead, she was being pulled away in another direction. Weak with betrayal, she let the current drag her in. She knew where she was headed. She just needed to breathe, and she'd come back to claim what was rightfully hers, her body, her life. Down the street she soared, through the front door of the Russo's house. She had no choice. She climbed into the atrophied figure stretched out on the bed, desperate to release the pressure in her lungs. Haley waited for the heaviness to abate, but if anything, it had grown. She took deep, gasping breaths, unable to escape the vice clamping her chest. "Help me," she croaked. Mr. Russo rushed in and grasped her hand, a shriveled, veiny claw. "Mom, I'm here. The doctor said it won't be long now. You'll be at peace." Hot tears leaked out of eyes that were not hers, and the thin chest that was not Haley's moved up and down, and finally stopped.
Millie, wake up! Come on, it's your birthday! Today's a very special day. You're 18! Mom's working, so you get to spend the whole day with me. Meet me in the living room when you're ready. Da 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 da.
My sister Elena sings cheerfully at me while shaking the mattress. I get out of bed and stare in my mirror with a disheartening annoyance. My mousy brown hair lays as limp as death, and my eyes are so unremarkable that barely anyone knows what color they are. My spindly frame, flat like a boy, leaves a lot to be desired. I'm not the prettiest of girls where I come from, and definitely not as beautiful as Elena. She's 27 and has been perfect since, well, before I was born. Every hair and curve perfectly in place. I don't hate her for it like some sisters would. She's always been more like a confidant and mother figure to me. I trudge down the stairs and pour some cereal into a bowl. Elena's perched on a chair, her eyes brimming with excitement. She starts in before I even sit down. Okay, Millie. What I'm going to tell you may sound strange, but today, your life changes completely. Yeah, I know. Today, I'm legally an adult. I'm now legally able to be held accountable for all of my decisions, along with the tidal wave of credit card offers that could suck me into debt. I interrupt her. Elena's face gets serious and she cuts me off. No, well, I mean, yes, but that's not what I'm talking about. Now, you know the women in our family have always been a little different, right? I nod in agreement. It's true. The lineage of women we come from were all strikingly beautiful, independent, and strong-willed. I don't see what that has to do with this, though. She continues. Well, every Valentine's Day after our 18th birthdays, something called the blooming takes place. It sounds weird, but hear me out. You were born on February 13th, so there's not much time to teach you everything. Once again, I interrupt her. It's a habit of mine. Elena, what are you talking about? I'm too tired for this right now.
Stop being so cryptic and weird. Millie, I'm serious, damn it. Listen to me. She pounds her fist down on the table in front of me, then smooths out the tablecloth, trying to soften the gesture. Go out tomorrow and find the right man. If you feel one drawing your spirit near, that's the one you want. She goes on explaining despite my incredulous expression. Meet him for a date and let him take you home. Make sure he lives alone. There are several ways to find out without being obvious. And let nature take its course and call me the next day. Tell me everything. I say something to her about my first time being special with someone I loved. By this point, she has her hands on my shoulders and is looking into my eyes. So I did as she told me. A tall, handsome man catches my eye the next night. I pretend that today is still my birthday. I'm amazed at how easy this is. He seems captivated by everything I say. The lines flow smoothly off of my tongue. My giggles are provocatively placed with perfection. After some slight prodding, I find out that he lives alone. So I let him take me home. Our chemistry continues to build, and as these things do, nature took its course. It's 100% new to me, yet my body knows exactly what to do. What I like and didn't like. Being able to know what his body liked, it was euphoric. I wake up the next day, a bit sore, but happy. He's still lying there beside me peacefully, his back facing me. I snuggle him and he feels like cold marble against my skin. I roll him over and uncover him. Eyes open, no pulse. He looks withered like a grape left in the hot sun. This hulking man from last night was reduced to such frailty. His skin almost dust-like. A slight smile rests on his thin, mummified lips. Not knowing what else to do, I call Elena in a panic and give her the address. Hey, she told me she wanted to hear all about it afterwards. Besides, my sister's the one who told me to do this in the first place. This is her problem too now. If anyone knows how to help me, it's her. I can't go to Mom with this or call the police. What would I even say? I'd be known as the dead lay girl for the rest of my existence, and that's if I manage to avoid a murder charge. I'm losing it. I can't even look at him. What the hell did this? There's a knock at the door. After checking the peephole and seeing my sister's face, I open it. Elena is smiling wide, completely calm. Tears are streaming down my face in horror. Elena, help me! What did I do wrong? I did exactly what you told me to do. What's wrong with me? Why is he dead? My life is over. I start clawing at my hair, my voice becoming unrecognizable with hysteria. She gathers me into a hug and starts to chuckle. Your life is not over. His is. And nothing. You did exactly what you were supposed to do. I look at her, more confused. I start to yell and scream at her, but this time she's the one interrupting me. Millie, stop.
Go look in the mirror.
I go into his bathroom and look at myself. My eyes are blue, like the Caribbean. My hair is a flowing mane of chestnut curls, and my body curvaceous and beautiful. My skin utterly flawless and perfectly complected. I feel the power of his essence within my breath. Now I understand. I understand everything. I'm getting the hang of it now. And things are going to be so much fun.
I was 8 when my brother Josh died. I remember it vividly, even now. Every little detail from when we woke up until his very last breath. He was 2 years older than me, and we would fight nonstop, like most siblings do. That day was no different. We got up early, before our parents did, and raced down the stairs. He won, like he always did, and was able to claim what little was left in the box of cereal. I was so mad at him for that. After we had finished breakfast, we ran outside to play. It was a warm summer morning, and I can still imagine that wall of heat hitting me as I opened the front door. We played for hours without pause, and it remains one of the best memories I have of him. He died around noon. A long drop, a crunch, and a snap. It all happened so fast. I just stood there, frozen, watching as the pond of blood grew and listening intently as his final wheezing breath left his broken body. Shock, my parents said. I was in shock. They couldn't get me to speak for weeks. I observed when the ambulance arrived, the paramedics and firemen shouting to each other and moving with urgency. Then the sirens dying out in the distance. My mom and dad left, sobbing inconsolably. I stood silent as the funeral came. I held my breath as they lowered the coffin into the awaiting depths. And only after I saw the headstone loom before me could I allow myself to talk again. We moved shortly after the funeral. My mom could no longer stand living in the house. My dad reluctantly agreed, but kept telling her that they would be losing money on the sale. Mom didn't care. No amount of money could have persuaded her to stay, to live on the property that stole her Josh from her. I knew then that nothing would ever be the same again. The new house was quite a bit smaller than the old one, but I liked it. It was cozy and sweet, and had sort of an old cottage vibe to it. And even though I missed Josh, I was happy to have a bedroom to call my own, to decorate as my own, to grow up in. Days, weeks, and months passed, and not much changed. There was an aura of gloom about the family, a lingering grief that wouldn't quite let go. It was like the days just faded into nothing, like none of us really were there. Originally, I thought that was the reason it came. It was drawn to our grief, to our constant, ever-present sorrow. The first time it came from the walls was 3 months after Josh's death. It was a day like all the others, gray and uneventful, and I had drifted off to sleep later than usual. My body maybe somehow aware that there was something unnatural nearby. I awoke in the darkness by an unidentifiable sound, somehow coming from all the walls at once. It was sort of a soft clicking sound, rising in pitch, then lowering again. I had never heard anything quite like it, and I sat up in bed, squinting, trying to make out where it could originate from. After a few minutes, my eyes were slowly adjusting to the darkness, and my gaze was drawn to a hole in the wall. It was just a tiny knothole, maybe an inch or two, but for some reason I was convinced it was the source of the sound. I sat there for minutes, trembling, just staring into the hole, not knowing why. Then I noticed it started widening, yet inexplicably remaining the same size. I crept under my sheets in fear when the head squeezed through. I just lay there, frozen, unable to move or make a sound. I could hear it moving around out there, like it was exploring, searching. I must have stayed under the sheets for hours before I finally just passed out. The next morning, I jolted awake with a scream and immediately ran to tell my parents about it. They dismissed it, of course, just some vivid dream caused by an overactive imagination. They were sure. I tried to reason with them, but soon just gave up. They just wouldn't listen. This kept happening for weeks. I would wake up to the soft clicking sound, stare at the hole, and hide under my sheets when I saw the head emerge. I could never get a good look at it. I was far too frightened, but it was completely bald and the skin had an ashen gray complexion to it. I could never really judge the dimensions of it because of the impossible nature of its arrival. I would plead to my parents to just believe me, or let me sleep with them, or simply just explore the knothole or tear down the walls. But they would dismiss me every time, usually just telling me I was being childish, that it was all just a nightmare and that it eventually would stop. One night, I decided I wasn't going to hide anymore. I was going to face the thing that came from the walls, figure out what it wanted. I was terrified, but resolute. I woke up like all the other nights, listening intently to that eerie clicking sound, staring at the knothole with absolute concentration, swallowing deeply as the hole started to widen, and choking back my fear when the appalling head squeezed through. It landed on the ground with a thump, and I stared in horror as the tiny, underdeveloped body writhed on the floor, struggling with the weight of the oversized head. I let out a scream then. I just couldn't hold it in anymore. The creature raised its head strenuously, like an alerted animal, and stared directly at me. There were holes. Nothing but holes. The mouth was a yawning chasm of nothing. The nose and eyes the same, just endless abyssal rifts. I screamed again, this time probably loud enough to wake up the entire neighborhood. My mom says she still has nightmares about that scream, and she'll easily admit it froze her blood to ice. My parents came running into the room in a hysterical frenzy, only to find me alone, curled up on the floor in a fetal position, screaming my lungs out. It took them hours to calm me down, and they said I only spoke nonsensical gibberish. They took me to my aunt's for a few days, but eventually I was forced to sleep in my own room again. The ritual continued. I woke up, stared at the hole until the head emerged, then hid under my sheets for the remainder of my conscious night. I was slowly but surely getting used to it. I'd still tell my parents about it. They still wouldn't believe me. I know it sounds horrible, but you have to understand they were still dealing with the death of Josh. They simply had no energy to indulge my self-induced traumas. But at some point, I got too used to it. I simply stopped waking up. The sound no longer bothered me, and I would just sleep through it. Problem solved, right? I certainly thought so. Until I woke up one night with the thing on top of me, staring right into my face. Those endless abyssal eyes swirling away, that gaping chasm of a mouth hovering inches above. I was too mortified to scream, my body now somehow unable to move at all. As an adult, I could have simply written it off to some extreme form of sleep paralysis, if it wasn't for the next part. Foul-smelling black liquid started pouring from the creature's orifices, completely covering, drowning my face in it. My mouth was filling with the awfulness of it, and at some point I swallowed some just to catch my breath. The taste was that of death, of decay and rot. I was panicking, desperately trying to move, scream, do anything at all, but I couldn't. I was trapped, and sooner or later, I just passed out. I woke up in a pond of the black liquid. I showed my parents the foul stuff and explained what had happened. My dad said they had seen some signs of leakage around the house, so it must have been that. Just some stale, putrid water seeping through the roof. I resigned then, from ever asking them anything again. They simply couldn't be trusted. We moved a couple years later. I would see the creature every night, but made sure to set an alarm so that I never had to wake up to that horrible creature's face ever again. But now I was free, I thought happily. We were getting along better as a family. We were finally moving away from that cursed place. And for months, I felt wonderful. I had a semblance of life again, of freedom, of joy. But then one night, I woke up to the soft sound of clicking. I sat up and scanned the walls, and there it was. A tiny knothole, and a head squeezing through it. Moving didn't help at all. The creature followed me wherever I went. I'd be free for a couple of months, tops. Then I would wake up to that sound and that head. Every once in a while, I would sleep through it and wake up with that ashen gray face inches from my own. The liquid would pour, and I would swallow. Then I'd wake up in a pond with no one there to believe me. I grew up depressed, stressed, unhinged, half mad. Somehow I made it through school, college, even got a job. But it would never feel good. I could never feel joy. I could never connect with another human being ever again. The creature wouldn't let me. It slowly drained my life from me. When I was 25, my doctor told me my physiological age was that of a 50-year-old. Start exercising, he said. One day, 3 years ago, I went back to the place it all started. I had known for years already, maybe even always, what caused it, what brought it to me, what it was. But I could never take it in, never admit to it, never confess. And that was always the reason for my punishment. I stood by the gaping chasm of the abandoned, dried-up well where Josh had fallen in, staring into the depths. I remember every moment of that day, every detail vividly. I remember playing hide-and-seek. I remember hiding behind the garage. I remember seeing Josh looking for me around the well. He stood so close, so dangerously close. Then I remember how mad I was at him for eating the last of the cereal. And I remember creeping up behind him and pushing him with all my might. Then an endlessly long drop, a loud crunch, and a blood-curdling snap. "I am so sorry, Josh," I said then. "I didn't mean to do it. I thought it was just water." But his vengeance is endless. Endless like that drop. Endless like the black of the creature's eyes. Endless like my suffering. I will go to sleep tonight. Every night. Forever. And it will come from the walls.
I remember the day I first noticed it. Its green bulbous stems protruded at odd angles, angles that shouldn't have been possible, and yet they were. I'd never seen a plant like that before. Was it even a plant? I had no recollection of planting it and couldn't figure out where it came from. It just appeared one day, much like a cancerous cyst. I eyed its curious stalks, the color a deep and menacing red. The moist sap dribbled onto the blackened earth, forming a puddle that reflected in the morning sun. It glistened so brightly that it hurt my eyes. I wanted to approach it, observe it up close, but every time I tried, I'd feel this crippling anxiety that gripped me so tightly that I found it hard to breathe. I needed to get rid of it. Something told me that it shouldn't be there. I felt foolish. It was just a plant, wasn't it? Albeit a peculiar looking one, but nothing more than a plant. I tried to tell myself this. I armed myself with a pair of large shears, gripping them tightly. As irrational as this may sound, I hoped that they would protect me, hoped that they would serve as armor. I couldn't explain why. Something about this curious plant petrified me. I stepped outside. The wind chilled the sweat that had formed on my brow. With caution, I took a step forward, as if I was approaching a bomb that could go off any second. As I neared, the fear that had enveloped me tightened its grip. My breathing became erratic and my heart beat like a drum. I tried to shake it off. It's just a plant. I kept repeating that to myself over and over, hoping it would stifle this unfounded dread. For a moment, it did. I took a deep breath and moved even closer. That's when the smell hit me. It was putrid and hot, hanging in the air like a decaying corpse. I pinched my nose tight, but the acrid smell still trickled through, like thick and balmy oil. I could feel bile rising in the back of my throat. With watery eyes, I watched the plant sway gently in the soft breeze. With each motion, the smell intensified. I lifted the shears with all the strength that I could muster, and with one swift movement, I severed it at its stalk. The stem fell to the ground, and I could have sworn I felt the earth below my feet tremble. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air. The air felt so much lighter, cleaner. I exhaled, feeling relief. I felt weightless suddenly, as if I'd been carrying bags of wet, putrescent planks across my back. I hadn't noticed the drastic change until I'd severed its gnarled stalk. The next day, I woke up feeling fatigued. My body felt heavy, gluey, and entirely unlike my own. I walked with legs that felt like thin sticks of wood, hard but flimsy. When I reached my kitchen window, I found myself feeling faint at the sight that greeted me. It was the plant. It was back and more grotesque than ever. It stood tall as me, in fact. It was exactly my height. Its bulbous shape pulsated in the hot sun. It was almost smoldering. I could see smoke emanating from its crooked stalks. The leaves glistened as if doused in fuel. I could almost smell it. I looked down at the blackened earth and saw its roots throbbing and warping, stirring the dirt that surrounded it. It moved closer. It beckoned to me. I pleaded with it. "No, please. I don't want to." My voice sounded gritty, as if my vocal cords had been shredded. I was no longer in control of my own body and found myself walking toward the plant. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My throat felt raw, my mouth wet. I touched my face and glanced at my fingertips. They were covered in soil, damp and coarse. I looked down and saw that my body was caked in blackened earth, as if I'd been buried alive. I didn't know what was happening to me. As I neared the plant, my vision became blurry, and I passed out. When I awoke, I saw my kitchen window. I was in my garden upright, but I couldn't turn my head to look around. I tried to move my arms, but I found that I couldn't feel anything. The sensation of my limbs was absent. I could feel the panic rising within me, threatening to erupt like a violent volcano. That was when I saw her. She was standing by her window, eyeing me curiously. She began moving toward the door slowly. In her hand, she held a large pair of shears, the same shears that I know I owned. She was exactly my height.
I've been in therapy for anger management for the past 6 months now. No, I didn't hulk out and get arrested for battery or anything like that. My husband sought out therapy for me due to me snapping all the time. It's my go-to. My mind is always so caught up in trying to right itself. It's a jumbled knot of doubts, insecurities, and fears. Each time I stop and try to even attempt to straighten and separate that knot into rational and irrational pathways, our son Martin interrupts me, sending the thoughts back into their nest of dread like a startled turtle. Questions are too much to bear at times. There have been plenty of instances where he's tried to get my attention and I've snapped at him, only for him to have wanted to show me a picture he drew for me. With all of my heart, I can assure you that I don't want to be this way. My husband Josh and I had an extremely hard time getting pregnant with Martin. It took us 4 years and 2 miscarriages. It sickens me to have given birth to this beautiful, healthy child, only to snap at him all the time. Anyway, that's my deal. My therapist told me to start writing things down and, well, I kinda got addicted to it. When one of those vile, intrusive thoughts enters your mind, treat them as if they were leaves floating on a stream. Briefly acknowledge them, then let them float on by until they disappear. Don't try to hold on to one for too long, and the ones that are too large to float, write them down. Especially anger. Get it on paper and out of your heart. If someone makes you mad or hurts you, write them a letter. You don't even have to give it to them. The act alone will make you feel better. Those were his exact words. Today is the day that Martin and I go to the local mall to see Santa. The line's impossibly long, weaving in and out of the aisles like the frayed ends of my hair. I have to remind myself that even though Martin was 3, and likely won't remember this, it's an investment for his future. It means a lot to me as a mother to have these memories with him. He will only be little like this once. It would be so much easier if Josh was here with us. He's been working 2 jobs to ensure the best Christmas possible for our little family. That's what I tell myself, at least. In reality, I feel like a single parent, as shitty as that is to say, and that I have to do everything concerning Martin on my own. But I paste a smile on my weather-numbed face and wait in line with my little guy. Like a good mom. Martin's hand is squirming around like an electric eel in a frying pan. One step out and the people behind us would bum rush us out of the line. And I really don't want to have to punch someone in the face today. When it's finally our turn, store employee elves lift little Martin onto Santa's lap, pausing just long enough for pictures. It takes my most embarrassing efforts to get him to cooperate with Santa long enough to get a decent one. He rattles off a lengthy list, appropriately creative for a little dude his age. An elf presents him with a candy cane as he hops off of Santa's lap. I thank him and turn around to leave.
Ho, ho, ho. And what would you like for Christmas this year, Mommy?
Santa asks, stopping me in my tracks. As this happens, Martin drops his freshly unwrapped candy cane on the floor, initiating a siren of tears. The man playing Santa still stares at me expectantly despite the display. Can't he see how badly I want to leave? There are a lot of people behind us, and I can already hear sighs of annoyance as an unknown voice from towards the back of the line drifts up to us.
See, Bonnie? Naughty little children don't get presents from Santa. Don't be like that little boy. Okay, honey?
Jesus H. Christ. What a douche. I sputter the first thing that came to mind. I'm good, thank you, Santa. Have a Merry Christmas. And rush Martin away from the line. There's a little play area in the lobby next door with cookies, and a make-your-own ornament station with a sign that has Santa's Workshop painted on in large green glittered letters. Next to it sits a square mailbox with pencils and paper, all laid out on a table underneath it. It seems kind of redundant since the kids literally just got done telling him what their wish lists are, but I guess it's cute to be able to have something to save. Martin waddles over to the mailbox right away and knocks all of the pencils off the table. Of course he does. My frustration is boiling, but instead of lashing out at Martin, I engage him in an activity. If he's focused, I can focus. We toddle back over to the table together and I hand him a pencil as I take one myself. He repeats the list he made for Santa as I write it down. Once he's finished, I tell him to take his pencil and draw Santa a picture as I decide to write my own note. Dear Santa, this year, I just want peace. I want to wake up in the morning in silence, if only for 10 minutes. I want to go sit on the toilet in peace, without interruption. I want to sleep in until noon like I did before I had kids. I want to have a life again. Can you do that for me? Didn't think so. Signed, one exhausted mother. Martin drew Santa a picture of a squiggly cat with 5 eyes. I giggle as I fold the piece of paper to stuff in the envelope. Another mother comes over and asks about enrollment for pre-K. I stifle the urge to tell her to calm her tits, and that enrollment isn't until May. But I smile and answer the question. The sooner I'm done with this one final interaction, the sooner I can go home. It will be overwhelmingly soothing to go from a crowd of dozens of people to just Martin and I. It feels suffocating sometimes. It's later in the evening now. Things are settled, and Martin's asleep in his warm bed. I find the pants I was wearing earlier. A folded square of paper is retrieved from the pocket and placed on my dresser as I leave the room to throw them in the wash. I hate it when paper gets washed. It breaks into those endless little bits. You'll get them all back from the lint trap if you're lucky enough to have it transferred to the dryer and not get stuck in the washer drain. Josh gets off from his second job soon, and I want to take a nap to be fresh when he comes home. The time after work where we talk about our day is sometimes the only alone time we have together. We both look forward to it all day. Martin left one of his blankets on our bed from earlier in the day. I inhale his sweet little boy smell, feeling a tear slip down my face just as I remember the letter I wrote to Santa earlier. My sorrows lull me to sleep quickly. I'm surprised to find the sun shining through our bedroom window when I wake up. Martin must be sleeping in. Normally, he's tearing through the house before the sun even thinks to rise. The clock on my bedside reads 11:17 a.m. I run to Martin's room, only to find a storage room. The presents Josh and I put under the tree for him the night before are gone. No discarded toys stab my feet as I walk next to the tree. What's worse, every single handmade ornament we have ever made with Martin is gone. I run sobbing to our bedroom, throwing open the door. The folded note is still on our dresser. My hands shake as I begin to open it. Horror grips my senses as I see it's not the note I wrote, but the one I wrote for Martin. His squiggle cat still danced across the side of the page. Violently, I start to shake my husband awake.
Joshua,
Joshua!
I screeched through tears.
Where's the baby? What happened to Martin?
My husband stares vacantly through sleepy eyes. His lips hold a tone of concern as he asks, "Babe, who's Martin?"
I had just about finished the genitals on the gingerbread man when my husband's voice boomed through the kitchen, making me slip and leaving one particular cookie way more endowed than he had any right to be. What? Y'all don't make yours anatomical? It's a naughty little Christmas tradition we started since we have no children. Don't act like you don't do it, or know someone who has. Anyway, Mike was beyond mad at whatever the hell he was going on about in the other room. I stifled a sigh and gave myself permission for a quick eye roll before entering the living room.
The fucking Browns. Do you see this, Helen?
He asked, frantically gesturing to our front window. No response entered my mind or left my lips, as I knew I wouldn't need one.
This is a tiny, boxed-in cul-de-sac. There isn't room for half of the holiday shit he puts up.
He paused to let out a scoff.
And this new one, this takes the cake.
Across the street sat Mary and George Brown. They were the sweetest older couple, never hurt or bothered anybody, but for some reason, they represented every insecurity my husband had about himself. He was never too rude or hateful to their face, but only because I bore the brunt of his verbal diarrhea behind their backs. An inflatable Santa Claus consumed most of the entrance to their front yard, like 10 pounds of leaves crammed into an 8-pound trash bag.
They even park their car on the street to make room for it?
Mike prattled on. The tinny chime of our doorbell interrupted his tirade. My gratitude for a temporary escape sped my steps to the door. Mrs. Brown's rosy face greeted me from our front porch. "Hello, Mrs. Brown. Would you like a cookie? I have some freshly made in the kitchen." My manners completely made me forget the fact that they were naughty gingerbread cookies, tits and all. I was all too relieved when she declined. Proverbial sparkles danced in the corners of her eyes as she smiled up at me. "George and I are going out of town to see our boys for the Christmas holiday, back home to West Virginia where we're from. We'll leave tomorrow morning and we'll be back by Sunday evening if the weather permits. Do you have any plans, dear?" she asked. I could tell she was hopeful for a certain answer, but which one I wasn't sure yet. "Nope, not really. We're just gonna buy a pre-made turkey from Publix and open gifts before bed on Christmas Eve. My family came down sick this holiday, so we're going to reconvene in January when everyone's feeling better." An audible sigh of relief escaped her thin lips. "Oh, that's too bad about your folks, honey. But would it be any trouble for one of you to collect the mail and maybe shovel the walk the day before we're due back? I'll be happy to pay you for your troubles," Mary explained. Mike wasn't going to be happy. But when an adorable little lady asks you to help her, what kind of person would I be to say no? We had to shovel ours anyway, and, well, theirs was just across the way. Hell, I'll do it myself if he doesn't want to. "Of course, Mrs. Brown. We'd be happy to. No payment necessary. You guys just have fun on your trip, okay? If you really want to pay me, bring me back some pepperoni rolls, yeah?" I winked. She chuckled, agreed, and told us to have a Merry Christmas as she left the front porch. I watched as her aging frame shuffled across our yard and into hers, stopping to brush some loose snow off the Santa Claus before going inside. At first, I thought Mike was just being an asshole, but the thing really is grotesquely huge. My husband had overheard the entire exchange and is now eyeing me furiously.
Aren't there enough things that you ask me to do here at home?
I cut him off at the pass. Yeah, I know, it's really no big deal, okay?
How long are they going to be gone?
Only 5 days. She's gonna bring back pep rolls. It's gonna be fine. Mike's eyes took on a glint of mischief as he inhaled to speak.
So, do you think they'll deflate Santa before they go?
What the fuck?
If they don't, can I do it?
He interrupted. At this point, I just wanted it all to be over with. The last thing I wanted to incur was another one of his rants. The negativity takes layers off of one's life, I just know it does. So I agreed. If they don't deflate it, you can let the air out of the damn thing. As long as you don't damage it. I don't care. But you're shoveling that walk. The next morning came and went. We waved the Browns off as they drove away. The Santa Claus loomed in their wake, swaying tauntingly at my husband. It was almost funny, really. I can remember the giggling despite the anger I felt boiling in his chest. Don't be upset. You get to deflate it, remember? Give it 1 hour and... Mike was already across the lawn heading into their yard. It was really amazing how long those things take to fully deflate. We watched it from our front window. It was sad, like watching the wicked warlock of the North Pole. It just melted into itself until it was nothing but a nylon puddle in their front yard. I spent the rest of the day researching the internet. That's what it's there for, right? Seriously though, I had no idea how to reinflate that thing by the time they got home. I wasn't sure if it needed a pump or if there was a button you pushed. Mike was completely unsympathetic to my concern.
We'll just tell him that it was really windy here one day, so I deflated it to prevent it from being damaged. Problem solved. It's better than my initial plan of stabbing a hole in it with a shovel and saying it was an accident.
Unbelievable. The welcoming smell of coffee didn't wake me the next day, nor the morning sun shining through the windows. It was the sound of my husband yelling in the kitchen.
What the hell is this?
He was gesturing frantically once again toward our front window.
I can't fucking believe this.
The Santa Claus stood proud and victorious on their front lawn, as if nothing ever changed. I couldn't believe my eyes. Maybe it's on a timer? I muttered uselessly. My shoulder knocked back against the wall as I backed out of his way. His eyes were menacingly wide, and his features were set hard. It looked like they had never seen a day of joy. A clatter came from inside the kitchen as he rummaged through the dishwasher. Mike, hey, what are you doing? My voice came out high-pitched but even-toned. Getting angry hadn't ever done me any good when he got like that. He emerged with a kitchen knife, one of the sharpest that we had.
That windstorm?
He breathed through huffs.
Maybe it blew a tree branch into their Santa and I didn't notice it until I was shoveling the walk.
Those poor people. I really shouldn't joke about such things, but maybe I should increase my knowledge of divorce law for my New Year's resolution. A scream cut through the cold air, lingering to muffle through the window panes before reaching my ears. I began to run to the front door as fast as my feet would take me. On my way out, I glanced to the window. The neighbor's front yard was a smattering of crimson against the white of freshly fallen snow. My husband lay gurgling in the street by their mailbox. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. As I looked up from the screen, the Santa was moving. A figure dressed in black erupted from the middle of the Santa suit, bleeding profusely from the stomach. He left trails of blood throughout the snow as he ran off through their backyard. The police came in no time at all, apprehending and calling an ambulance for the man who had now killed my husband. It turned out he'd been casing their home for a couple of weeks. He knew they'd be going on vacation and depended on the cover of the inflatable to hide himself until nightfall. The robber survived his injuries and fully served out a 5-year sentence in a prison the next county over. 5 years. That's all he got for ruining my life. Christmas will never be the same to me. I've since remarried during that time, and we now have a 3-year-old daughter. A chill goes up my spine every time we see an inflatable Christmas decoration. And what's worse, our neighbor just put up the largest inflatable snowman I've ever seen across the street.